see here. Hey, what's up, everybody? Jerry Handley here, my good friend and buddy Nick Kyle, Dr. Nick Kyle. I should be officially in an official meeting of performance minds and beards. You might be able to figure out why. We're both pretty smart, and then we both have performance-oriented beards. So let's see where this is going right now. For those of you who don't know Nick, he is the owner, like one of the owners, I should say, of MoveRight Performance PT. They are actually just like a mile, literally 1 mile down the road from us, which is awesome because they do such a good job. And I mean, like it says, performance therapy is his forte. It's like qualifications and education are like top like 0.1% of the PT field actually. So Nick, I actually want you to take like 30 seconds and introduce yourself here.
Yeah,
like you guys do.
So obviously, thank you for that, because that's on point for basically what we are. We're performance oriented. We put performance in the title because we feel that the classic physical therapy model is just kind of failing people, generally speaking. And so we wanted to orient ourselves into the idea that we are collaborative with the client to be able to help transition from this injury status all the way back through their normal activity, their sport performance, what they are choosing to do, and that we're here to help facilitate that. We believe that physical therapy and strength and conditioning are the same thing. They live in the same realm. It's just a matter of where you fall on that spectrum as to what is the specific need at this time. And we believe in the process of meeting you there and helping to collaborate to transition you back in. And that's where we have so much crossover for the people that we work with, and then within our community here. And like you said, like we're literally like just an arm's reach away from each other at any one time. I could smell the coffee at Viking from here.
If you're ever running low, just come by because we're closer than Get to Go or Sheets. There's gonna be something ready. So like one of the things I love so much about what you guys do, for example, is, I've been in strength and conditioning. It'll be 18 years next month. And like from the very beginning, I saw like even at WVU at the college level and the last 7.5 years privately here, the difference between like really sports medicine approaches and then PT specifically being a return to action field. And one of the things that I like actually communicate a lot with people that I see, especially parents, athletes, clients, is that they have to remember where kind of the medical field, so particularly PTs or surgeons or like the other main crew, come from. And, the first rule of medicine is do no harm, right? And so great first rule of medicine. But as a result, you have an entire field that is rooted in conservatism and conservative cautionary approaches, and combine that with where are most PT's goals. And a lot of them may simply be, we want to get you back to a like functioning baseline or what's considered like no longer at risk, etc. It takes a special like attitude, personality, focus point, but then also like educational approaches to be able to actually focus on getting people to the performance levels they want to be, which, is totally different. And that's really that's what you and I are getting together on these calls for now, is to talk about that, how these approaches can be combined appropriately, so that for people who aren't simply happy enough going to a PT or getting treatment just to be like, okay, but people who want to be at least as performance oriented as they were before, or maybe, ideally even back to where they were so they can continue to get better than that.
Well, and really, man, like I think that's maybe the biggest highlight of the difference for how we approach things, is that when somebody comes in the doors here, we are not in the business of telling you what you can't do. We are here to help set guardrails so that you can continue on, because most injury states, most problems can continue to be worked around and worked through with proper management. So like if you understand why something is happening the way it is, then you can do a lot of things to work around it. So it's about continued participation rather than take 8 weeks off and then let this calm down and then get away from it. And then maybe we can start going back in and back after it, but rather like, let's take what you can do. Let's figure that piece out, and let's give you some guardrails so that you don't drive off the mountain over here and you don't slam into the wall over here. And everything in between is fair game. And let's just use that time to kind of explore your movement, find out what your capacity is right now, and then we can build strategy around it. I always say that it's, from my standpoint, it's very much a coaching relationship. And I take so many cues from what I've seen from, people like yourself, over the years of being around some of the strength and conditioning field, to be able to have a common language and a common understanding for how we integrate with other people, right? Like with these clients, for that collaboration between the two fields, so that people don't come in here and when they come into the gym, they have their 45 minutes of PT work and then 30 minutes of warm up, and then they might be able to get a lift in or not, and then they got this cool down cycle. Like it should all be integrated together so that your PT work is your warm up, your self-assessment tools. You make some tweaks within those primary movements for whatever that person's athleticism requires, and then allow them to kind of explore that movement even further, and that's where our integration really is so beneficial to people within our community.
Right. Now I love that, like having this opportunity here, because this is the way that any form of performance training, like us with strength and conditioning, or even just sports coaches in general, and like I said, any form of medical side or recovery side, whatever, again, specifically you guys in this case with PT, this is how it should be able to work together. Is we're both looking at it on the same page. We both understand what the client wants, and then actually working on speaking the same language and using the same types of tools to get them to that place, rather than what normally happens. And for people listening here, when I say normally, I'm talking sadly like 99% of the time. I don't mean like just kind of sort of. I mean almost always what happens is you end up with, say, performance side like a strength coach or a trainer like me, or a sports coach, and then no communication whatsoever with a PT or like a medical professional or a doctor, whatever it may be. And when there is communication, it's more of just like a passed on, like word or phrase, or, set of like basic instructions. And more often than not, those instructions are made assuming or passed down, that assuming the other person isn't going to know anything or be on that same page either. Like it's normally, to start off, it's normally one directional, coming from the physical therapist group through the client, pass this on to your trainer or your coach, whatever. And it's almost always like a highly cautious focus on don't do this, rather than focusing on what you can do to work on getting better. It's normally simply don't do this. I said, and the way you and I are able to work, and like I said, it's awesome for the people we have that we actually work with together, and is that we can actually work on that and make sure that they, you tell athletes or me directly, things to either like move away from, work around, or include, or things to focus on. I'm able to give you feedback as to how the training is going. And again, and like this isn't just people only physically here, we also have clients that live, a couple of hours away that might get programming from me, and then come and see you, maybe once a month or whatever it might be, or just even for tweaks when they need it. So it's an approach that works both on a regular, consistent basis. It works on a as needed basis, and it works on even a distance approach. Because if we can get everybody on the same page with the language and understanding what they need, and I think to me the most important part of what you said was they get to basically then experiment and find things out. Like you said, it's like, here's where you don't go this far. Don't go this far either. Everything in between is fair game right now. Let's see what works better for you. I think that's one of the things that works out so well.
100%, man. And that's that's the approach that we take, kind of universally speaking, but also the idea that when we start discussing things like movement, mobility, those kind of hot topics that come up so frequently within the PT world, right? Like, we're going to do these exercises, we're going to work on mobility, we're going to work on this stuff. It really comes down to the person's ability to adapt to various environments and various tasks. And so if you only have one way of doing something, that adaptability is really, really, really narrow, right? So like if the only way that I can squat is with a safety bar to a 20-inch box, and it has to be like reverse banded, or I don't know, whatever, something ridiculous, right? You have one way to accomplish this task. It's the only way that you can do it. You're not very adaptable. So you're not very ready to be able to participate in a variety of activity that are going to mimic that same movement, which is, a hinge pattern, a bilateral hinge pattern, or hip dominant movements. And so that's going to show up in everything else that they do. So if we can give them like kind of that guideline of like, hey, go and try this stuff out, play with your squat, but just, maybe modify how your foot placement is, maybe modify this, and let's just see what happens. Let's explore around, see what becomes comfortable, what is uncomfortable, and kind of work back and forth to increase that adaptability. And when you do that, when you create those neurological pathways for somebody to have more options for how they complete a task, all of a sudden, a lot of those repetitive injuries start to decline because their brain now is able to look at a multitude of different ways of doing things. And I mean, injury and pain, and that's the big language for me, right? Is pain, injury stuff. Mm-hmm. That's what we get a lot of. What it really could be classified as is a lack of adaptability, because you've now honed yourself down into one single capacity for being able to complete a task. And when you do that enough times, it's like cracking open that beer can, and the first time you do it, the tab is fine. But if I keep moving that over and over and over and over the exact same way, eventually that tab's going to break.
I like that. That's a nice analogy. That's good.
Yeah, and that's one of those that I use a fair amount, because it really comes down to the point of like, that's not the only way to open a can, right? Like, you could take a knife and shove through the top of it. You can do 1,000 different things, but we choose one way, and then we harp on that one way over and over and over until that tab fatigues. And so like, that's a lot of injury status stuff. It just doesn't give that opportunity for the system to calm down, because you only have one pathway to do it. So like, that's why we like that guardrails analogy, because I want you to do things in 50 different ways. I want you to do weird stuff. And I do believe, like, kind of bringing this back a little bit, when we were in PT school, like, we don't get a lot of strength education. Like, people seem to think we do. We don't. You get very cursory information. You get kind of like this 1,000-foot view, but we believe that we know everything. And that's the most terrifying thing whenever somebody comes out of school, is that they think that they're competent, right? They're unconsciously incompetent because they don't know what they don't know. And the reality is, there's no perfect way to do any one thing. Is it Dave Tate that had the saying that's, you don't coach the lift, you coach the person, right? So like, maybe something like that. But it's about being able to recognize the need of the individual, not this one perfect set way to be able to do all tasks, right? Exactly. There's no one way to squat, and you shouldn't do that one way.
Yeah, man. Like I got hooked on training 20 plus years ago because I was a nerd, to be honest. It's like, I loved training. I had loved training. I had gotten into it just randomly, and then really gotten serious about it when I started figuring it out on my own for martial arts. But what got me hooked into it for other people was the variability, like how many variables there were to manipulate. Yep. And yeah, like, I love how many times you focused on adaptation, because that is it. Like, I mean, it's one of the biggest things to me. Like, I still remember learning this officially in school, but I feel like most coaches, most the physical therapists, like medical professionals, never, like, they just, to them, it's just something you gloss over, like in biology or maybe in an exercise science class. But I mean, I still remember, and it's funny because, like, my first boss, my original mentor, Mike Barwis, like, would spit this out like this, especially talking to recruits, to like families and everything. But everything comes down to that adaptation. And I said, like, Wolff's law, the human body conforms and adapts to the intensities and directions it is habitually subjected to. And like I said, like that literally tells you everything. It's like the body will adapt because we are an adaptive organism. That is training. That's like we don't have, for example, here at the gym, we don't have a training philosophy per se, in the sense that most people, when they think about that, they think about being in a certain realm of training, and that's what they do. Whether it's like, oh yeah, we're like a powerlifting style like program. We're an Olympic lifting style program. We use very like RPE, rate of perceived exertion. We're hit based, like whatever. Again, you have all these different styles. That's what most people focus on as a philosophy, rather than simply treating everything as a variable, everything as a tool. Every exercise is something you can manipulate and modify in what is going to be best for these athletes, for these clients, and exactly like you said, what's going to be best for these individuals. And that's where, that's like one of these places where team training or group training, like that's like where even the best of those programs can eventually hit a wall, is that, pretty much by design, they have to be all doing the same thing, when the individuals themselves may need something different at a certain point, even when they're on the same team or in that same group. And the more you can identify those things and make those little changes, or educate them to look for them themselves as well, then the better you end up getting that result.
Yeah, and I think that like what you're saying there, especially in that maybe that high school athlete setting, like where you have like the team sports environments, you nail that, and I think that that's one of those things that that so often is misunderstood or misapplied from that general population that would work with those individuals, is that one program does not necessarily cover all bases for every athlete in that sport. So the needs of a lineman are very different than the needs of a quarterback, right? Mm-hmm. So like how to educate and adapt and create some fluidity within the same program, right? Like I tell people all the time, people get strong every day running 5-3-1 and run it their entire lives, right? Like Jim Wendler, you can run that same exact program, but I can write a 5-3-1 program and you can write one, and they're going to look different. And we can take those programs and adapt them to a specific individual through accessory use and like some modifications, bar choices, changes in grip, like the whole deal, to allow it to be made in such a specific way to address greatest limiting factors. And so that's where that, like I said, with the team approach, helping a kid to understand that, you're a 300-pound lineman. You're not going to do the same thing as the kid who's the wide receiver on the team. You guys have a program that looks similar, but your application, your actual execution of that program has to be different, and helping them to understand their own needs, man. Like that's a really interesting task. I love how like I get to see the stuff you post up on social media with that. It's so interesting to me.
Thanks.
Like that idea, like not in my wheelhouse. Like I can do that on a one-on-one.
That's the thing that keeps me going. I love this type of stuff. Yeah,
that's awesome, man.
Yeah. What's crazy is like I said, the same type of idea also happens with adults in general fitness. Like say it's in every case, and that's especially where, again, maybe us, but then your ability to work with people comes in, because like adults more so than, well, increasingly teenagers, but adults especially are going to be much more likely to be trapped in this time frame or this zone of, we do literally the same thing almost every day.
Yep.
And that also means we probably don't do these things almost every single day. And plus you have on the fact that years are adding up, just straight math of bad stresses versus good stresses. So that's when a lot of things pop up. Like a lot of these things that people think, are like kids or teenagers being, whether it's like more flexible or they recover faster, that's kind of true. But when it comes to things being wrong, that also means you're getting to the end of like to where that becomes a problem sooner.
Right.
Like actually, like, not to go down like a side road there, a rabbit hole, but I almost feel like, for example, looking at, say, how much kids play now on their phones, how much sooner are those like low back issues, neck issues happening in adults? It's like that type of thing. What might have started popping up when you were in your late 30s now might be happening in your mid 20s because this is happening sooner in school, etc. But again, it's like a 10, 15, 20 year buildup of bad habits. And then it's like, hey, how do you actually make this person like move differently? What's better for them? And anyway, kind of bringing it back to where I wanted to go, though, is that when it comes to general fitness, is not just simply the like needs, but also people's different body types and issues, like you said, because like there isn't that one correct way to squat. There isn't one correct way to get in shape. I mean, hell, if you want to get really technical, there isn't even one correct way to ride a spin bike,
Right.
like there's all these different ways. And that's when like the better you're able to actually think about these things, we can try different things, like whether it's a different stance, like I said, like even moving, like changing the way like the toes are pointed in a certain movement, because if you can take 3 people who are 5'8" tall, and all of them are going to have different levers at their hips, their knees, their ankles. So they're all going to have none of them are going to be able to squat exactly the same and give you the same exact product.
Well, and tomorrow, you might take the same person that's 5'8". Today they're going to squat one way. Tomorrow they might squat totally different, and like not necessarily made severe differences, but that comes into like that's where my role, or what I feel my role is with people, is to help educate so that they understand when I walk into the gym. Today is squat day. How do I do a self-assessment rapidly? And I use that as, this is your warm-up. So like we're going to use these warm-up movements to be able to do some rapid self-assessment to say, you know what, I need to take my toe out just a tiny bit today. Like when I'm squatting, I need an extra warm-up set to get my hips a little bit more prepared, a little more ready. That's so going along with what you were saying there about as you get older, you see people tend to have more and more issues because there's so much repetitive nature in what they do. The dogmatism of this is how I squat or this is how I deadlift, and having the exact same stance every single time, same exact bar placement every single time, you're neglecting the adaptability of your body in that. I have this kind of like a general rule of thumb that if I'm working with somebody for an extended period of time, around every 6 months, we need to do a reassessment of how you're squatting, because your body has changed. You're adapted to different things. Tissues become stiffer. Some things might be more limited. You might have improved your strength in various areas, and now we can modify and change how you're going after that. But not only is it individualized in the nature of today, but it is a ever-changing process, and it should be a fluid process for someone. That's what we always look for, is like, how can I help you to create fluidity in your movement vocabulary so that you can look at something and say, you know what, I don't feel quite right today. I need to maybe adjust these things, and this is some options that I have. And again, going back to that setting guardrails of, I'm not going to go too far this way, and I'm not going to go too far this way, but I can play with everything in between here.
Yeah, I love that, and I'm also an enormous fan of warm-ups that do something.
Yeah, not just doing it for the sake of doing it, but using it as a tool, and that's what it should be.
So biggest thing I wanted to finish on, I thought would be a great exercise, and also like really good for the people here listening, is again like examples of the relationship with how the physical performance therapy like chain to like through the client with the performance coach to all help the client like should work. And like so we have lots of examples here, because unfortunately everybody that I work with that does have some form of physical therapy isn't going to be able to work with someone like you, and vice versa. But so for example, like this is just a story from this week, which is why it's so fresh. But I have a young man that we just started working with, and he's a high school athlete, and he actually had like shoulder surgery earlier, like a couple months ago. And he's a multi-sport athlete. I'm sure that happened from a whole lot of things at once, from what I've heard. But, it was a couple months ago, and he's way past the right after a surgery stage of everything being like sore, etc. But anyway, came in and he was under the instructions of, don't work out at all. It was one of those things. It was like, don't do anything. And I'm talking to him and I say, he's telling me this. I'm like, and again, I'm actually double checking that that's really what he means. And I'm like, okay, so you should be able to work out your legs right by now. Like you should be able to do your legs. You should definitely be able to use your other side at least. And, it's like, I'm completely fine with you don't need to use your shoulder side. Just simply focus on whatever PT program they have, because I mean, they are going to be the professionals here. Like they're the ones taking care officially of that. That's like, that's okay. But you can definitely work out your other side. You can definitely work out your legs. But again, like he kept saying how this is definitely, they told him not to. And I explained to him what I told you, I said at the very beginning about like, this is where they're coming from. Their focus is do no harm. They don't want anything even remotely risky to have what they consider to be a risk. Even if there isn't really a risk, if they consider it a risk, they don't want you to do it. So we need to fix that if we're going to get you better as possible. So I was like, literally by tomorrow, I was like, I want you to, you have 24 hours to talk to them, to like ask them specifically about lower body, ask them specifically about your other arm. And again, thinking about what they're probably worried about, I'm like, tell them specifically that you will be doing nothing with the fall risk, like absolutely nothing like imbalanced, anything like that. And also tell them that, for now specifically, we will not load that shoulder at all. So nothing will even be on there like a barbell, etc. Like we will stay completely away from there for now, nothing like that. Tell them these things and let me know what they say tomorrow. And sure enough, the very next day he came in and said, yeah, they said we can do all of that. We're good to go. So we were able to instantly get him on a lower, start some lower body training, get that like readapted and start like reintroducing it to training, get the other arm going a little bit. And plus, he was just way more engaged instantly because he was no longer showing up just to simply be there, but he was actually able to do something. And it's like he knew, he knew, his dad knew, his coaches knew, like everybody knew that it's probably actually okay. But it's just when those are the instructions you get from the people in charge, it's like most people's like what they do is simply wait for it. Like they wait for that rather than, I said, I'm try to get a lot of these people to actually go and get the answer they know that they deserve.
Well, and that highlights so much how important it is to be clear in the message, to be very clear in the language used with people, especially whenever it comes to athleticism. So like if I'm talking to somebody and like, oh, you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that, like, man, that sends a very specific, that creates this fear of how to do things. And we really shouldn't be in the business of creating fear for anyone, except like, let me say this way, because there are groups of people that you have to be extremely specific and extremely limiting to, because if you don't, they'll take it to the, as far as they can possibly take it. Right?
That's where knowing who you're talking to makes such a huge difference.
It does. Yep. But for the most part, man, like that's the way that you handle that obviously is the most professional way you can. Just saying like, hey, let's communicate this, let's talk about this. But obviously, like the issue comes down to there's a massive fear of loading that happens in physical therapy, because we are taught all the worst possible scenarios that can happen, following a surgery, following an injury and this kind of stuff. And so unless you understand that loading process and understand how tissues can adapt to load and where like your actual safe lines are, there's a huge misapplication of that, because a lot of stuff and surgeries and stuff like that, and I can't speak to that one specifically because I don't know the details of it. I wouldn't imagine to, but it's rare that you have a surgical process that has to remain entirely unloaded for a very extended period of time. Obviously, like you have your initial healing processes and that kind of stuff that has to happen. You've got to respect it. But the idea of applying load in various ways is important. It is necessary for tissues to adapt and heal. It's exactly what you said, Wolff's Law. We need loading stress in order to be able to heal things and allow them to get back to the way they're supposed to be. And there's a really lagging understanding of how the application of stress can be done in a safe way and how to transition it. And what you'll see a lot of the time, especially whenever it comes to shoulders and stuff like that. And I know, like, I'm going down the rabbit hole, obviously. This is not where you intended to be.
Oh, but, good. It's great.
But yeah, there's, if you look at protocols given from a lot of like the surgeons and stuff like that are outlining where somebody should be and what they can and can't do, there's a real huge gap in understanding for how and when you can apply load and how to actually ramp that load up, because it goes kind of 0 to 60 on a lot of those protocols of you can't do anything for 12 weeks. And then at the 12-week mark, you can start doing like, you know, this, and this. And it gets taken as an all or nothing instead of like, hey, why don't we try this? Let's titrate this up. Let's see what your responses are to these things. This is relatively non-painful. Let's try this. And really, it comes down to understanding what was the surgical process, what happened, what was the injury to begin with, and what are the greatest limiting factors. And there's so much stuff you can do to work around that. Day one, that kid should have been doing BFR on the other arm, right? Like,
yes, exactly.
Right? Like day one, because it shows crossover adaptation, growth hormone. They could be monitoring his diet. They could be paying attention to, like, if he had shoulder surgery done, can we do some stuff with the wrist, the hand, the forearm, maybe some elbow type stuff, like depending on where he's at. Can he accept load into that shoulder? If he's completely unloaded on that, what can we do? Because there has to be some ways to work around it. There needs to be that, because otherwise he's going to come back and have a major deficit on that side and really predispose himself to having a greater injury or greater risk anyway. So, man, I get worked up about this stuff. If you couldn't tell, this is the hill that I choose to die on.
Same. And it's a place where being in a private business setting now has actually allowed me to really open up about it a lot more too. So, like, because I no longer am within an organization where I like that has those things. Now I can actually point out to people where they work great, but also where it can be better, and also remind people that it is about them and they have the right to go and ask for something that they know is like better corrected or something like that. That it doesn't have 100%. To be just like you, exactly like you said, so many things are traditionally black and white in the recovery or healing standpoint, where like nothing is black and white when it comes to your body in real life. And so, like, finding those best situations, man, we have so much stuff to talk about. Like, I love it. Where this is going. So Nick, Dr. Kyle, and I are going to say we're going to be getting together a lot more often on these things, so we can go back and forth on these things. Both of us love talking about it. Plus, we're going to get into some practical stuff later on as well, show where these things work together. And like we mentioned before, we both have clients also that we share, and like whether it's like just for short periods or touch-up points, anything like that. So we also want to, like, every once in a while be going back and talking about, again, those relationships without talking about the client specifically, but just how we can work through that, how two people can help one client together, again, where it's not all like, it doesn't have to be just simply like one unit, one structure. Like, you can get people from outside to work well, like with a system for that same person. So, all right, man.
Dude, I love it.
Yeah. Today. I'm pumped about this, and this is going to be good. This is going to be really good. So, all right, everybody, we will catch you guys later. And yeah, Nick, thanks, man.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.